We're also following lingering anger and unrest in Milwaukee after a police officer shot and killed an armed suspect. Protests turned violent overnight. An officer was injured when protesters threw rocks and debris. Milwaukee remains under a state of emergency.
At the center of all the chaos is the death of Sylville Smith. Police say Smith was holding a handgun with 23 bullets when he was killed by an officer. DeMarco Morgan has been following the protest and has more from Milwaukee.
Milwaukee police in riot gear faced protesters overnight. The department says an officer was hurt when rocks were thrown at this squad car.
My brother was not supposed to leave like this.
Hours earlier, Kimberly Neal shed tears and paid tribute to her brother, Sylville Smith. He was shot twice Saturday afternoon by a black Milwaukee police officer. Smith was 23, the officer 24. Chief Ed Flynn said Smith ran a few dozen feet after a traffic stop.
This event probably took 20 to 25 seconds. It was very fast. The individual was armed.
He had more bullets in his gun than the police officer had in his gun.
And 2 nights of protests, several fires were set, multiple businesses damaged.
This is your hometown.
City Alderman Russell Stamper told me a familiarity between the police and those who live here could be fruitful.
When we were growing up, they were passing out baseball cards, and you got to talk to the police and got to know who they were. We need to bring that effort back.
While volunteers work to clean up the debris outside this auto parts store,
I'm surprised this hasn't happened 5 summers ago.
Pastor Marilyn Miller is working to heal old wounds. She said people have been reeling since the 2014 killing of an unarmed black man by Milwaukee police.
We've watched person after person after person gunned down, no gun, no indictments, no people sent to jail from the police force. At some point, the community wants to know why.
DeMarco Morgan is on the ground in Milwaukee. DeMarco, describe the damage left behind by protesters. We can see some behind you there.
Yeah, Vlad, this is actually a BP gas station here that was burned, completely destroyed. As you can see, part of the frame is still standing, but also some of these cars right here, the vehicles that were parked here. This is just one of 6 buildings in this city destroyed as a result of the protests that broke out tonight shortly after the shooting.
So Milwaukee is under a state of emergency. What does that mean? What does that mean for the citizens? What does that mean in terms of resources available?
Well, Anne Marie, simply when a state of emergency is implemented and put in place, it simply means that anything from funding to security will be made available to the city of Milwaukee in the event that they should need it should something happen.
And DeMarco, what's the latest on that officer who was hurt?
Well, Vlad, I can tell you this. 4 officers were actually injured. 3 suffered minor injuries. 1 suffered a concussion and had to get 7 stitches. He was taken to the hospital and was treated and released. But back to Anne Marie's question, because I did want to mention some of the resources that have been put in place. Governor Scott Walker, he talked about how he has allotted and allowed 125 members of the Wisconsin National Guard to be on standby, again, should something break out and take place in this area, since we've seen what happened the night after that shooting. But the community leaders, people who own businesses, they were actually out here. Also city leaders basically walking door to door, sort of talking with some of the people who were in the crowd, just begging and pleading for people to, hey, behave. Don't act like this. And also the family members were basically saying that they didn't want their loved one to be remembered in a violent way, such as the things that have happened and also these buildings that have been destroyed.
Okay, so the National Guard is on standby. Community leaders are appealing for calm. But what is the city bracing for today? Do they expect more protests?
Well, there are no protests planned for today. Can't tell you if that will stay that way, because a lot of them have been sort of sporadic and have been popping up throughout the city. But there is a community meeting that is planned for some time tomorrow. Again, this community has had some tough tensions with the African-American community and its police department for years and years. Even when I reported and anchored here in the city some years ago, that tension, we're told by some of the leaders, it was just a boiling point. And this was just something that sort of sparked the riots and everything, the looting that has taken place in the city. Actually, Vlad, I know you had mentioned earlier before the show had started, you wanted to find out about whether or not some of the protesters were blocking traffic. There was a march that took place about, I think, less than 100 people that had sort of like, headed in the direction of a police precinct. There were so many people who were in the street where they weren't actually blocking traffic, but they were in the street, so cops were basically trying to keep them on the sidewalk to keep from getting that situation out of hand. But that was just one of the situations that has sort of taken place throughout here in the city.
DeMarco, before we let you go, I got to ask you about the Smith. This young man has a criminal record dating back to 2013. Some of the charges are not serious. Others are very serious. He was accused in a shooting last year, charged with recklessly endangering safety. That's a felony. No one is saying that he deserved to die. Police are saying he had a weapon. They haven't released that video yet. But what more do we know about him, and what more do we know as to whether or not the police are going to release the body cam footage?
Well, we should find that out. The mayor is actually holding a press conference at 10:30. But as for his background, you're right. He does have a criminal history. He is also the father of a 2-year-old, and we haven't been able to dig just too much into his criminal history. You just named off a couple of things that the media has been sort of going after, and we are still working to get a number of documents so we can bring you more information from that angle. But again, he is a father of a 2-year-old, and as for his family, they held a candlelight vigil not far from here, and they were talking about how he was a great guy, and they loved him. And people loved him here in the city, but he also had a tough background when it comes to dealing with law enforcement. And they were also very instrumental in telling the crowd to also chill out, remain calm to keep the city together.
All right, DeMarco Morgan, thank you so much.